The light of dawn is a cold, silver thing when seen from the 40th floor. It bleeds across the Seoul skyline, a slow, merciless wash of light catching on the edges of glass and steel, promising a day that has already been bought and sold. Inside the elevator, a fortress of polished chrome rising through the silent heart of the Jangsin Tower, Amara felt nothing but the sterile chill of the air on her skin. She smoothed a hand over her blazer, a simple, charcoal gray piece she'd bought on sale, professional enough to pass inspection, but affordable enough not to break her budget. Her portfolio rested heavy in her lap, filled with a history of competence born from sheer necessity. She had walked into this building with one thing on her mind: stability, a quiet, predictable life for her son, a paycheck that didn't leave them counting coins by the end of the month. She had not, in any version of this morning she rehearsed in her mind, prepared to see the man who had taught her how to fall. The doors parted with a soft, expensive hiss, opening onto a silent, sprawling office. It was a universe of muted gray carpets and glass walls that reflected 1,000 versions of her, all of them small, all of them looking impossibly out of place. At the far end of the vast space, behind a desk that looked like a slab of obsidian pulled from a frozen volcano, he sat, her breath caught, a snag thread in the seamless fabric of the morning. A physical jolt, like a misstep on a staircase, sent a cold rush through her veins. 5 years. 5 years, and he looked the same. His hair was still the color of wet ink, his shoulders still broad beneath the sharp, unforgiving cut of suit that likely cost more than her car. He was a man carved from ambition and privilege. Only his eyes were different, colder, weighed down by a world she had never been invited into. He looked up from a document, his expression a mask of bored, impenetrable authority. And then his eyes found hers. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. For a single, breathless, suspended second, he wasn't Park Ji-hoon, the formidable CEO of this cold, silent empire. He was just Ji-hoon, the boy who'd traced constellations on her arm in a cramped rooftop apartment overlooking the city lights, whose unrestrained laughter used to feel like the only real, true thing in this entire, sprawling metropolis. The memory was a physical assault, sunlight through a dusty window, catching in the messy strands of his hair, the smell of cheap coffee and the sweet, reckless promise of forever whisper in the dark. His hand, warm and sure, laced in hers as they ran through a sudden summer rain, laughing till their lungs ached and the world felt like theirs alone. Then a shadow, the sharp, urgent tone of a phone call he took on the balcony, a door closing with a quiet, devastating finality. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. The memory vanished, leaving a hollow, familiar ache in its place. The silence in the office stretched, growing thin and electric, charged with the weight of 5 unspoken years. He rose slowly from his chair, his hands pressed flat on the obsidian desk, as if to steady himself against a sudden tremor only he could feel. Amara? His voice was a ghost, a whisper of a life she had meticulously buried under layers of resilience and responsibility. You're here. She lifted her chin, forcing the frantic bird in her heart to be still. The shock was a wild thing, but her voice, when it came, was even, cold. She had practiced this tone in the mirror 1,000 times, preparing for a confrontation that never came, honing it into a shield. I need the job, Mr. Park. She used his family name. It was a wall, a boundary, a clear and deliberate reminder that the boy she knew was gone, and this powerful, guarded man was a stranger. His jaw tightened. A flicker of something, hurt, maybe, or just profound surprise, crossed his face before the mask of the CEO slid back into its formidable place. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk, his movement stiff, unnatural, as if his own body was betraying his attempt at composure. My assistant scheduled an interview for a new PA, he said, his tone clipped, ruthlessly professional. She didn't mention your name. She wouldn't know it, Amara replied, taking the offered seat, her spine a rod of iron. I've been going by my mother's surname for years. Another silence descended. This one was heavier than the last, weighted with the unspoken reason why a woman might erase a part of her past. He knew. Of course he knew. He sat back down, the expensive leather of his chair sighing under his weight. He didn't glance at her resume, lying pristine and expectant on his desk. He just looked at her. Too long. Too soft. Don't. A voice screamed in her head. Don't you dare look at me like you remember what we were. The interview wasn't an interview. It was a tense negotiation of ghosts. He asked standard, impersonal questions about her experience and skills. She gave standard, polished answers. But between the lines, they were speaking another language entirely. The silent, brutal language of betrayal, of a 5-year-old wound that had never been allowed to properly heal. He knew she was qualified. Her work history was a testament to a desperate, relentless climb from one menial job to the next, clawing her way towards something resembling security. But that wasn't the real question hanging in the air. The question was whether they could breathe the same oxygen day after day in this glass cage 40 stories in the sky, without the past rising up and suffocating them both. Finally, he leaned forward, the faint scent of expensive cologne and sterile ambition drifting across the desk. His hands were clasped on the polished surface, and the morning light caught the edge of a simple silver ring on his finger. Not a wedding band, but something else. Something that looked just as binding. The hours are demanding, he said, his voice low, deliberate. The pressure is immense. This isn't a 9-to-5 position. It was a warning, an out, a final, courteous chance for her to turn and run. But she thought of her son, Leo, his bright, curious eyes that saw the world as a place of wonder, his small hand that fit so perfectly, so trustingly in hers, the crisp, red-lettered rent notice tucked inside her purse. Running was a luxury she had forfeited long ago. I understand requirements, she said, her voice a calm, unwavering line in the tense air. He held her gaze for a long, unreadable moment, his dark eyes searching for a crack in her composure. Finding none, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. All right, Amara, you start on Monday. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand to shake. The space between them remained a chasm, filled with unspoken words and silent, screaming echo of a slammed door from half a decade ago. She stood, gave a curt, professional nod that was a masterpiece of self-control, and walked out his office. Her heels clicked a steady, defiant rhythm on the marble floor, a sound that declared her survival. She had the job. But as the elevator doors closed, sealing her in with her own fractured reflection in the chrome walls, she felt a cold dread bloom deep in her chest. She had come here seeking stability, a safe harbor from the storms of a precarious life. Instead, she had just walked back into the eye of the hurricane. Work became a weapon, a neutral territory where the past could be held at bay. And Ji-hoon, it turned out, wielded his authority with surgical, almost cruel precision. Amara's first week as his personal assistant was a relentless blizzard of impossible deadlines and quiet, cutting power plays. He was a demanding boss, meticulous, unforgiving, and seemingly tireless. He'd summon her to his office with a single, impersonal buzz in the intercom, and when she entered, he would speak without looking up from his screen, his focus absolute. Reschedule my 10 o'clock with investors from Shanghai. Find the Q3 logistics reports from 2 years ago. They're misfiled in a corrupted archive. And I need coffee. Black. No sugar. He never used her name. In those first few days, she was a function, not a person. A pair of capable hands meant to execute his commands and smooth the path of his empire. And she met every single demand with an unnerving calm. She recovered the reports from the corrupted archive by calling a tech-savvy friend from a previous job, working a back-end solution that impressed even the company's IT department. She rescheduled the meeting with the notoriously difficult Shanghai investors, charming their formidable secretary with a blend of politeness and persistence. She placed the black coffee on his desk without a word, the heavy ceramic making a soft, definitive sound on the polish that said, "I am here. I am not breaking." The tension between them was a living entity in the office. It hummed in the loaded silence of late-night elevator rides, where they'd stand on opposite sides, watching the floor numbers climb in the reflection of the steel doors, each refusing to be the first to speak. It crackled in the air like static electricity when their fingers accidentally brushed as she handed him a file, a ghost of a touch that sent a jolt of unwanted memory through her. He was testing her, pushing her, heaping tasks upon her desk, as if waiting for a single one to fall, waiting for her to break. But Amara had learned to bend long ago. She was made of resilience. She was a single mother. She had juggled night classes and diaper changes, a sick child's fever, and her own final exams, all at the same time. This was just a man with a broken memory and a corner office. She could handle him. The real challenge, the real work, began at 5:30 every evening. While Ji-hoon moved seamlessly from one board meeting to the next, Amara's world shifted on its axis. Her focus, once spread across a dozen corporate tasks, narrowed to a single, vibrant, infinitely precious point: her son. She would rush out of that cold, glass tower, her professional mask dissolving with every step she took toward the subway. The city's rhythm, once a source of pressure, would pull her back to the life that truly mattered. Leo's daycare was a splash of bright, chaotic color in a gray, working-class neighborhood. It smelled of crayons, disinfectant, and sweet apple juice. And the moment he would see her through the window, his face would light up with a pure, uncomplicated joy that was the antidote to her entire day. He'd run into her arms, all small hands and breathless, tumbling stories. "Mama, we painted a lion. It was yellow, and I share my crayons with Min-jun, and teacher said I was a good helper." Holding him, burying her face in his hair, and smelling the faint scent of paint and playground dust, Amara would feel the armor she wore all day at the office melt away into nothing. This was her stability. This was her reason. This was her why. One evening, she was running later than usual. Ji-hoon had called a last-minute, non-negotiable conference call with the London office that had stretched on for 2 agonizing hours. By the time she finally got to the daycare, she was frantic with guilt. Leo was the last child there, sitting quietly with his teacher, meticulously coloring a picture of a dinosaur under the dimming fluorescent lights. The look of patience waiting on his small face was a knife in her heart. The guilt was a physical weight she carried into the office the next day. She was at her desk, trying to make up for the lost time, when one of the other assistants, a kind, motherly woman named Mrs. Kim, stopped by her desk with a cup of tea. She glanced at the photo Amara kept tucked in the corner of her desk, a small, simple frame holding a picture of Leo at his last birthday, a joyful smear of chocolate on his cheek, and a smile that could light up the world. "He's adorable," Mrs. Kim said warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Such a handsome boy. How old is he now?" "He just turned 5. Amara said, a real, unguarded smile touching her lips for the first time all day. Mrs. Kim's eyes widened slightly. 5? My goodness! You must have your hands full, working in a place like this. Amara just nodded, her smile tightening as she turned back to her screen. But she felt it, a sudden, drastic shift in the atmosphere of the office. The quiet, industrious hum seemed to falter, dropping into a sudden, expectant silence. A prickle of awareness crawled up the back of her neck. She looked up. Ji-hoon was standing in the doorway of his office. He hadn't been there a second ago. He wasn't looking at Mrs. Kim or the tea she'd left. He was looking directly at Amara. His face was unnaturally pale, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on her with a terrifying, piercing intensity. He had heard. He knew she had a child. That wasn't the secret. The secret was a number. A simple, devastating, world-altering number. 5. He walked slowly, stiffly, back to his desk and disappeared behind the glass. A moment later, her desk phone buzzed. That cold, impersonal sound now felt like a summons for an execution. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Yes, Mr. Park?" There was a pause on the other end, a dead space where she could hear the faint, sharp sound of his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, thinner, stripped of all its usual authority. "The photo," he said, the word strained. "On your desk. Your son." "Yes," she answered, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the receiver. Another pause. This one felt infinitely longer. The silence stretched between their two desks, across the plush gray carpet, through the invisible wall of glass, a silence filled with 5 years of unasked questions and unspoken truths. "How old is he?" The question landed not like a stone, but like a bomb in the quiet pool of the afternoon. Amara closed her eyes. The image of Leo's smiling, chocolate-smeared face flashed behind them. Her beautiful boy, her reason for everything, her anchor in the storm. She took a deep, steadying breath, and she told him the truth. "He's 5. She heard a sharp, ragged intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then nothing, just the dead, empty hum of the open line. He didn't hang up. He didn't speak another word. He just let the silence sit there. A silence that was now screaming with a truth he was finally, horrifyingly, beginning to understand. He just learned she has a child, a 5-year-old child. The math is simple, but the answer is devastating. Would you fire him for leaving years ago, or give him a chance to understand what he lost? Comment your thoughts below, subscribe, and hit the bell to see what happens next. After that day, the glass walls of the office felt thinner, more fragile. The professional distance Amara had so carefully constructed day after day began to show hairline fractures. Ji-hoon stopped burying himself in work whenever she was in his office. He would watch her, a quiet, haunted, searching look in his eyes. He stopped giving orders and started making requests. The questions began. They were never about the past. Not directly. They were careful, tentative steps onto a minefield of the present. "Do you have a long commute?" he asked one evening, as she was packing up her bag, his voice strangely soft. "It's manageable," she'd said, keeping her tone clipped and her eyes on the contents of her purse. "You work late," he'd say, another time, standing by the window of his office, looking out at the darkening city. "It must be difficult with your son." Each question was a delicate, painful probe. She gave him nothing in return. Short, polite, impersonal answers that were meant to build the wall back up, brick by brick. But he kept trying, chipping away at her defenses with a quiet, relentless persistence. The discovery of each other's hidden lives came in pieces, small, accidental glimpses into the prisons they had each built for themselves. One night, she had to stay exceptionally late to finalize a multimedia presentation for an emergency board meeting he'd called. It was past 9. The entire floor dark and silent except for the low hum of the servers and the rhythmic, hypnotic sound of rain lashing against the massive windows. She was heading to the high-end office printer when she passed his open office door. He was on the phone, his back to her, his voice a low, tight current of sound. "I don't care what father expects," he was saying in sharp, fluent Korean, his tone laced with raw frustration she had never heard from him before. The arrangement was a business decision. It was never about my life. No, I will not bring her to the winter gala. It's not happening. The deal is the deal. My personal life is not part of the negotiation. Amara froze in the shadows of the hallway. Arrangement. Father. The deal. The words painted a stark, bleak picture. A gilded cage, built of duty and expectation and billion-one deals. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the boy who had disappeared. Not a callous man who simply left, but perhaps a boy who was taken. Pulled back into a world that had no room for a penniless foreign girl he'd met in a summer storm. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close. But it was context, a sliver of understanding that complicated the clean, sharp edges of her anger. The next day, it was his turn for a revelation. Leo had drawn a new picture at daycare. It was a classic 5-year-old masterpiece of artistic interpretation. A wobbly-looking man with a huge, beaming smile, standing next to a house with a disproportionately large son in the corner. He'd used a dark brown crayon for the man's hair and eyes. Deep, almond-shaped eyes. Eyes that were startlingly, achingly familiar. He had titled it, in his clumsy, determined backward letters, "My Mom and My Daddy." She had been looking at her desk, a soft, bittersweet ache blooming in her chest, when she felt a shadow fall over her. Ji-hoon had come out of his office. She tried to cover it quickly with a folder, but she wasn't fast enough. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the corner of the paper peeking out. "What was that?" "Nothing," she said, her heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Just a note from my son's school." He didn't press, but his gaze lingered on the folder, a thoughtful, calculating look darkening his face. He knew she was hiding something. He just didn't know it was his own face, drawn with innocent love by a son he had never met. The elevator became their unwilling confessional. Trapped in that small, silent chrome box, the city rising and falling around them in a blur of light, the crushing silence would sometimes break. One evening, he looked utterly exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, a deep weariness etched into the lines around his mouth that his expensive, tailored suit couldn't hide. "Long day?" Amara asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them, a reflexive flicker of the empathy she tried so hard to suppress. He glanced at her, a flash of surprise in his eyes. He gave a slight nod, leaning his head back against the cool steel wall. "The board is restless." "They're always restless," she said, a hint of dry, unexpected humor in her voice. A small, tired, genuine smile touched his lips. "You sound like you know." "I type your meeting minutes, Mr. Park. I know they live on a steady diet of profit margins and institutional panic." He actually chuckled, a low, real sound that was so startlingly familiar it made her chest tighten. For a moment, the 5 years fell away. "They do," he admitted. "Sometimes I think my father invented that diet. It was a small thing, a shared, fleeting moment of exhaustion and corporate cynicism, but it was more honest and real than anything they had said to each other in weeks." Another time, she was scrolling through photos on her phone while they rode down, a habit to decompress after a long day. A picture of Leo at the park, caught mid-laugh, his face tilted up to the sun, his joy so pure it was almost painful to look at. Ji-hoon's gaze drifted to the small, glowing screen. She didn't hide it this time. He watched the photo for a long, silent moment. "He looks happy," he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "He is," she said, her thumb gently stroking the screen over her son's face. "He's a very happy kid." "He looks like you," she thought, the words a silent echo in her mind. "The way you used to look when you were happy." The air in the elevator grew thick, with everything they couldn't say. He respected her now. She could feel it. It was in the way he started asking for her opinion, not just her assistance. He'd hand her a proposal and say, "What do you think of this strategy?" He saw her competence, her intelligence, her strength, and she was beginning to see the man behind the mask, the son trapped by his father's immense legacy, the powerful CEO who looked at a child's photograph with a deep, hollow, and profound longing. The tension was no longer just the sharp edges of anger and betrayal. It was something more complex, more dangerous. It was a fragile, guarded empathy, an internal conflict that was pulling them inexorably closer, even as the unspoken truth between them threatened to tear them apart for good. The moment finally came on a quiet afternoon. She had stepped away from her desk to get a bottle of water. When she returned, he was standing there, utterly still, staring down at her desk. Leo's drawing. My mama and my daddy. She had left it out by mistake. He didn't move when he heard her approach, didn't seem to register her presence. He just pointed a single, trembling finger at the drawing. "His eyes," he whispered, his voice rough and strange. Who is this man, Amara?" The question hung in the still office air, a ticking bomb that had finally run out of time. And Amara knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that the slow, painful discovery was over. The confession was about to begin. The storm that had been threatening the city all week finally broke that night, unleashing a torrential, furious downpour. Rain hammered against the 40-story windows, encasing the office in a turbulent world of water and fractured, weeping light. Everyone else had fled hours ago, escaping the coming deluge. But Ji-hoon had asked her to stay. "We need to talk," he had said, his voice strained, stripped of all its usual command. Now, they stood in his office, the drawing lying on a vast obsidian desk between them like a judge's verdict. The city below was a galaxy of blurred, bleeding neon, and the only light in the room came from the faint, cool glow of his computer screen, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like accusing ghosts on the walls. "Who is he, Amara?" Ji-hoon asked again, his voice raw, broken. He wouldn't look at her. He couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from the innocent crayon drawing of a man with his own face. Amara crossed her arms, a familiar, protective shield against a raging storm inside her. "He's the man Leo imagines a father to be. He draws him in all his pictures." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." He finally looked up, and the raw, undiluted anguish in his eyes was so profound it almost buckled her knees. "Why didn't you tell me?" 5 years. "Why?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Tell you? How was I supposed to do that? Ji-hoon? Was I supposed to hire a private investigator to track down the man who walked out of my life without a single word and announced that our summer fling had life-altering consequences? You disappeared. You vanished from the face of the earth." "I didn't have a choice," he shot back, his voice finally cracking, the sound of a man breaking apart. He raked a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time she'd ever seen, pacing in front of the window like a caged animal. "You think I wanted to leave you?" "It certainly looked that way," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, each word a carefully placed stone. He stopped his frantic pacing, his reflection a dark, tormented silhouette against the rain-streaked glass. "My father found out about us," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the words themselves were a betrayal. "He was not happy. That's an understatement. To him, you were a distraction, a foreigner with no name, no money, no connections. You were a liability to the company, a stain on the family name." He turned to face her then, his eyes wide and pleading, stripped of all pretense. "He gave me an ultimatum, a choice. End it with you, completely and immediately, or he would make sure you were removed from the country. He would have had you deported. Amara. He had the power, the connections. He would have ruined any chance you ever had of building a life here, and he would have enjoyed doing it." Her breath hitched in her throat. All this time, she had imagined he'd left for another woman, for a better, brighter future that didn't include her. She had never, not once, imagined it was to protect her. He had already arranged my future, Ji-hoon continued, his voice hollow with the ghosts of old battles lost. A merger with a rival company, a deal sealed by my engagement to the daughter of the chairman. It was a business transaction that had been in the works for years. My life, my future, it was all just a chess piece in his grand game. And you were an unexpected, unacceptable variable. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. The rain beat a frantic, relentless rhythm against the glass, a soundtrack to her crumbling certainty. "So you chose a company," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "You chose your father." "I chose to keep you safe," he whispered, taking a hesitant, desperate step toward her. "I was a coward. I was 25 years old, terrified of my own father, and I thought I was protecting you by disappearing. I thought you would move on, forget me. I told myself it was the only noble thing to do." He was closer now, in the dim light. She could see the glint of unshed tears in his eyes. "I never forgot you," he said, his voice thick with 5 years of buried regret. "Not for a single day. Every soulless board meeting, every vapid networking event, I saw your face. I wondered what happened to you. If you were okay, if you were happy." He stopped, his gaze falling back to the crayon drawing on his desk. His breath shuddered out of him in a ragged, painful gasp. "Is he?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The question was too large, too world-altering. He choked on it. Her silence was the only answer he needed. It was a confirmation more powerful than any word she could have spoken. He staggered back as if she had physically struck him, pressing a hand to his mouth as a choked, strangled sob escaped him. "Oh, God! A son!" The words were broken, shattered, the sound of a man's world imploding. "I have a son." He looked at her, his face a mask of utter devastation and dawning, impossible wonder. "All this time he's been here, in this city, my son, and I never knew." The confession split the world in two. In the wreckage, Amara felt a sharp, painful, long-awaited vindication. But seeing him so completely undone, so exposed and vulnerable, it wasn't a victory. It was just a profound, sheer heartbreak. The white-hot anger that had fueled her for 5 long years began to cool and dissolve, leaving behind only a raw, aching sadness for the boy he had been, the man he had been forced to become, and the father he had never had the chance to be. He just told the whole truth. A story of fear, family pressure, and a terrible choice. But does it excuse 5 years of silence? Did he deserve to know her forgiveness, or face her wrath for the life he missed? Tap like. Tell us what you do in the comments, and subscribe for the final act. The days following the confession were a strange, suspended reality. The air in the office was thick with unspoken things. The tension didn't disappear. It transformed. It was no longer the cold, professional friction of a powerful boss and his capable assistant, but the fragile, humming, uncertain silence between two people who shared a secret that could either bind them together forever or tear them apart for good. Ji-hoon was a different man. He was hesitant, gentle. He moved around her with a careful, reverent air, as if she were made of glass. He'd leave a small carton of Leo's favorite banana milk on her desk in the mornings, a silent, clumsy offering. He'd watch her from his office with an expression of such profound, helpless longing it made her chest physically ache. He was trying to be a father from behind a wall of glass, and the futility of it was heartbreaking. But it wasn't enough. Amara knew it. Forgiveness couldn't erase the consequences. Understanding couldn't build a future. The final confrontation came a week later. She requested a formal meeting. They sat in his office, the door closed, the bright afternoon sun glinting off the silent city outside. She hadn't come with anger or tears. She had come with terms. "I know your confession was real, Jihoon," she began, her voice perfectly steady, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. "And a part of me, a bigger part than I'm comfortable with, understands why you did what you did. But understanding isn't the same as accepting." He just nodded, his dark eyes full of a deep, settled pain. "I know. Leo is not a secret," she said, her voice gaining a quiet, steely strength. "He is not a consolation prize for a life you regret. He is my son. He is a happy, brilliant, wonderful little boy who deserves more than a father who is still afraid of his own shadow." His head snapped up at that, a flicker of protest in his eyes. "I'm not afraid." "Aren't you?" she challenged him softly, but with unyielding firmness. "You're still living under your father's thumb. You're still tangled in whatever arrangement he made for you. As long as you are, you have no real place in Leo's life. I will not have my son be a scandal that you have to manage. He is not a line item in a corporate risk assessment report." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He visibly slumped back in his chair, the last of the fight draining out of him, replaced by a heavy resignation. "What do you want to do, Amara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I want you to choose," she said simply, her gaze clear and direct. "Not for me, for him. You can choose a company, the family legacy, the safe, predictable path your father laid out for you. Or you can choose to be a father, a real one, in the light, with no apologies and no conditions. But you cannot have both. I will not let you." She laid down the boundary, a clean, sharp, unforgiving line. Forgiveness was one thing. A future was another thing entirely. "If you choose your father's world," she continued, her voice unwavering, "I will resign at the end of the day. We will disappear again, and I swear to you, this time you will never find us. Leo's stability and peace of mind are more important than your regret or my heartbreak." She stood up then, her decision made, her purpose clear. "The choice is yours, Jihoon." She left him there, sitting alone in his silent glass kingdom, with the crushing weight of two entirely different futures resting on his shoulders. For 2 days, there was only an agonizing silence. Amara went to work. She did her job with flawless professionalism. She watched him in meetings, saw the brutal internal war raging behind his eyes. She saw him take phone calls on a balcony where he argued in low, furious Korean. She could feel the pressure from the board, from his family, closing in on him from all sides. She prepared her resignation letter. She started looking at apartments in Busan online. She prepared to protect her son, even if it meant breaking her own heart all over again. On the 3rd day, she was packing the few personal items from her desk into a small box. It was late. The office was empty. She had placed a crisp, white envelope containing her resignation on his desk an hour earlier. She was done. The doors to the elevator chimed, and he stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was loosened, and his hair was slightly disheveled. He looked exhausted, but for the first time in days, his eyes were clear. Resolute, he walked over to her desk and picked up the resignation letter. Without reading it, he tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall from his fingers into her wastebasket. "I'm not accepting this," he said, his voice firm and quiet. He held out his hand. In his palm was the simple silver ring she had seen him wear every day. "This was my grandfather's," he said, his voice low. "My father gave it to me when I became CEO. He called it a symbol of the legacy, of my duty." He closed his hand into a tight fist, the ring digging into his palm. "My duty is not to a building, or a stock price. My duty is to my son." Her breath caught in her throat. "I told my father everything," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told the board. I walked away from the engagement this morning. The merger is dead. My father, he may never speak to me again. There will be consequences, a public fallout, a mess. He took a slow step closer, his eyes searching hers, full of vulnerable, terrifying hope. But none of it matters if I don't have you. And him. He didn't ask her to marry him. He didn't make grand, sweeping promises of a perfect life. He just laid his choice, his sacrifice, at her feet, raw and real and terrifying. He had chosen. He had chosen them. He opened his hand again and placed a legacy ring on her desk. "I'm not asking you to forget the past," he whispered. "I'm just asking if we can start building a future. All three of us." Amara looked from the heavy silver ring to his face, the face of the boy she had once loved with all her heart, the face of the man who had irrevocably broken her, and now, the face of the father her son deserved to know. She didn't say anything. She just picked up her bag, walked around the desk, and took his outstretched hand. Weaving her fingers through his, she held on tight. Together, they walked to the elevator, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty office. As the doors closed, sealing them in, she saw their reflection in the polished steel. No longer two separate, fractured people standing on opposite sides of the divide, but two people standing together, their hands joined, ready to face the storm. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was a story of consequences, of difficult forgiveness, and of a love that was finally strong enough to find its way back. Not a beginning, but to a new, more honest start. She taught him consequences, and he chose to face them. She let him back in, choosing to build a new family from the wreckage of the past. Do you think she made the right choice? Comment your verdict. Subscribe for more stories like this, and turn on the bell for episode 2.